We see it now in the place of David. There are situations in which God works according to his own logic. He does not follow our cultural logic or religious logic, whatever it is. God is no respecter of persons, no respecter of our cultural traditions, and in his freedom he can elect anyone to carry out his purposes and his responsibilities. That's why we are protesting here that the chairmanship here belongs to everybody. You know? You see? We are protesting here because of this sort of thing. God is no respecter of age. God is no respecter of gender. God is no respecter of whatever it is. God can elect anybody to do his work. So that's perfect. God looks at the heart, not at outward looks. First impressions can be deceiving. It takes time to know other people well enough as to do a fair assessment of them. We know how often we have been disappointed, even by people we trusted very much. However, God knows our past well as our own future, since he always sees us from his eternal presence. Everything is present to him. Therefore, God is concerned with our hearts, the source of our motives, the center of our being. Of course, our certificates may help, our training may assist, but God is not concerned very much with those. It's very much concerned with the character, the inside person of who we are. We can hide and deceive everybody else except God. So Psalm 23 gives us an idea of what was in David's heart. He had a relationship with God like unto the shepherd and the sheep. He trusted his life to God, and God took care of him. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me to quiet waters, green pastures and quiet waters. He restores my soul. And so that he was able to say he has no fear about anything. He has no fear about anything. I was listening to the last speech of Martin Luther King this week. And he comes to the point where he says, I've been to the mountaintop. God has enabled me to get to the mountaintop. We will get there as a people, but whether I'll be there or not, I don't know. And then he speaks about not fearing anything. I don't fear anything now. I don't fear any man now, because I've seen the glory of God. Fear taken away. Now, he even goes as far as saying that, even God prepares a table, a feast, in the presence of his enemies. Have you ever heard of anybody having a party when the enemies are at the door? When the city is under siege? No, but with God, he says that God prepares a table for him, even in the presence of his enemies. When he was confronted by his sinfulness, David repented. When Nathan went to him after the sin with Bathsheba and said, you are the man, he repented. And we have, if tradition has it right, in Psalm 51 that we use very often. He did not try to justify himself or give excuses. He cared about the life of his enemies and the evil done to them, we see him weeping bitterly over the death of Saul and Jonathan. We see him weeping bitterly over the murder of Abner. We see him weeping bitterly over the murder of his son, Absalom. Absalom had risen against him, but he says to his commanders, please, if you find my son, spare him, don't kill him. They find him, they kill him, and they come back and say, where's my son? Kill him. And he cries. So, we can see from that psalm the inner character of this David. That's why he is called a man after God's own heart. Somebody who delighted to do the will of God. That even when he missed that will, he was repentant and came back because he could not afford to live without God. John chapter 1 verse 9, Jesus is introduced here as the Logos of God. The word Logos was a very important word in the Greek language because of its general and philosophical use. It meant the spoken word. It also meant rationality, reason. It also meant the principle of intelligibility that controls the laws of nature. That principle that makes nature understood. That principle what makes it possible for us to experiment with nature and to discover certain things which are constant about its behavior. In other words, it is this Logos that created or made possible the ordered universe. And so, John uses the word Logos to introduce who Jesus is. It is this understanding that he used to introduce Jesus to the Gentile world. He dared even go beyond the Greek thinking by saying that this Logos that was related to the mind, the pure mind of God, even though trapped in matter, was actually God and also created matter for its own sake. In the beginning was Logos, and Logos was with God, and Logos was God. Without Logos, nothing would have been made that was made. And in this Logos was life. That's what he says. And then in verse 14, which we haven't read, he says, and the Word became human. The Logos became a human being, full of grace and truth. A human being, full of grace and truth. Now, as we see it in verse 4, he says that in him, in this Logos, was life, and this life was the light for humanity. It is this life full of grace and truth which becomes now light for each one of us. Because if we have to know what it means to be authentically human, we have to look at this Jesus Christ. His humanity. Because in him was the real, authentic humanity. At one time he was arguing with the Pharisees, and he says to them, if you cannot believe my word, then believe my works, for they speak about me. Word and action were one and the same. And I think that's why the Gospels speak of Jesus as being without sin. Which one of you accuses me of sin? or of having done anything wrong. Because for him, word and action were one and the same. He spoke what he meant what he spoke. Or he spoke what he did and did what he spoke. One and the same. And we find that Jesus accuses the Pharisees and others of being hypocrites. Because for them, their word and their action went in parallel ways. You see? They went in opposite directions. That's what hypocrisy is all about. You say one thing and you do the very opposite thing. And so Jesus says, look to me. This one, who is full of grace and full of truth, is the one whose life now becomes the light for humanity, the light for his disciples. This is the one that we're following, and we're disciples of this one who is full of grace and full of truth. Jesus is the light that the darkness has failed to overcome. That's what John tells us. With human history, we have one who has already overcome darkness, for which Zoroastrianism has to wait for the end time. As we follow Jesus, we too can learn to overcome the darkness in our hearts, in our minds, in our feelings, in our communities, in our relationships, in our cultures, in our